Hello everyone, and welcome to True Colors, a show I like to do about true crime and my artwork, which is coloring based. If this is your first time here, I want to thank you so much for stopping in. If this is you returning, thank you so much for being here again. Welcome back. I'm excited to tell you about what our story is today. Today we are covering Israel Keyes, a horrifically scary serial killer who took his victims at random and planned his murders in areas years and years in advance. I just wanted to insert a quick edit here and let you know that this is going to be Israel Keyes Part 1, so that way you guys don't have to sit through that long of a video. Hold on to your booties. This is going to be quite the tale. So let's get into a little bit about who Israel was. Israel Keyes was born to his parents, Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes, on January 7th of 1978 in Cove, Utah. His family was a very religious family practicing Mormonism, and they were very large, having 9 siblings, with Israel being the second born. So his parents didn't believe in the government, they didn't believe in public schools, they didn't believe in modern medicine, and they didn't really want the government to be a part of their lifestyles. And without being in school or going to see doctors, it wasn't really a long time before the Department of Human Services came knocking at the Keyes home and looking into the health and safety of the children. Heidi and John, fearing for the safety of their children, not wanting those children to be put right in the government care, exactly what they were trying to avoid, packed everything up, purchased a big lot of land in Colville, Washington, where they built a single-room cabin where everyone there lived. There was no heat and there was no electricity, and from that point on, they were homeschooled. Heidi would take the kids in the winter months to live with her family in Florida so that, there wasn't a big problem with the cold because the cabin didn't have, again, no heat or electricity. So at least they did partially care for the children and, kind of just lived off the land. And so this was the early formative years. So during the early parts of his childhood, it became very evident that Israel was interested in guns, and he would find ways to steal guns, like he would break into people's homes and steal them. Some of them he would keep, some of them he would sell for money. He would hide them all over the place. He used them for hunting. And it was also known that he would torture animals. It's unclear if he tortured them with the guns per se, but he did torture animals. Keyes himself saying that as a teenager, quote, "I've known since I was 14 that there were things that I thought were normal and that were okay, that no one else seemed to think were normal and okay." And during those teenage years, at some point, he told his parents that he didn't want to follow religion anymore. He didn't believe in religion at all, and he wasn't going to follow theirs for sure. And this was when his father completely cut ties with him and kicked him out of the house. Now, he did stay in contact with his mother, and, all in all, as a mom, the mother, Heidi, she really did care for the kids, but she didn't really advocate. She kind of let Keyes go. He built a small little fort on the property, semi away from the original cabin. He stayed there for a while until 1998 when he joined the U.S. Army. Now, in the Army, he did very well as a soldier, and they think part of that is because of the structure that being a soldier gives you. Even spending time in Fort Hood, Texas, and Fort Lewis, Washington with former friends of Keyes during that time in the Army, saying that he was quiet, he had a really big habit of keeping to himself, but on the weekends they noticed he had a habit of really heavy drinking, including drinking full bottles of wild turkey to himself and using substances such as cocaine. While he was in the Army, he did receive a DUI, which is pretty much one of the only things on his record when he was captured. But other than that, they really never he never really got into any kind of trouble. And so it would be while he was in Fort Lewis that he met a woman who he was with, and they were together for 6 years, and he would have a daughter with her. In 2001 of July, he was honorably discharged from the Army, and shortly thereafter, it kind of didn't go well with him and the girl that he is with that had his daughter, and they split, and he took his daughter. So eventually he would move on and he would meet a new girl, and they would go live on the Macaw Reservation community of Nia Bay in Washington. And so he'd be in that relationship for a little while, and then that one ended, and he would meet his, a new girl. And the new girl ended up getting a job in Anchorage, and she was just so enthralled with Keyes that she said, "Hey, I'm moving to Anchorage for this job. Do you want to come move and live in Anchorage with me?" And Keyes accepted and agreed. When he first got there, he kind of did some odd jobs here and there. He worked as a handyman, and eventually he also opened up and started his own business called Keyes Construction. He used to travel a ton to see his family throughout the lower 48 states. And so that's kind of the life he was living on the outside. So now we're going to get into some of his crimes. So we're going to bounce around with kind of how we discuss his crimes. We're going to start out with the earlier years of his life. We're going to get into his most known case, and then we're going to get into some more information that we learned after his capture. So let's get started out with the earlier things that we learned about him through his interrogations. Keyes told investigators that his very first crime was in the summer between 1997 and 98, and it was a girl, and this was on the Deschutes River in Oregon. Keyes said that he believed she was between the ages of 14 and 16, and he was at the time living in the area of Maupin, and he was around 20 years old. So what had happened was he was watching this group of girls as they floated on inner tubes down the river, which is a really big thing they love to do in Oregon. And he watched as they were moving further, one of the girls was starting to get separated from the group. And eventually she was, kind of completely separated from them. And as soon as she was close enough to the shore, he grabbed a hold of her and he dragged her to this outhouse that he had found. And he stated that he had planned on killing her. He did sexually assault her, and he had planned to kill her, but lost his nerve. And the FBI is under the, believes that the reason that he didn't quite have the nerve to kill her was because she likely humanized herself to him. So she was telling him her name, telling him information about herself, like about her mom, maybe her sisters, or, other information, stuff about herself to make her seem like she was a person and not just an object. And what Keyes said about the situation and about the attack was, quote, "I wasn't violent enough. I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again," end quote. And unfortunately, the crime went unreported to the authorities, and as to this day, that girl has not yet come forward. I can't imagine that I would ever want something as horrific as that to to be replayed in my head again. So if I could just accept it and move on with my life and do good, I would. So I hope that that's what that poor girl has done, is accept it and move on, and knowing that she's safe. Keyes himself claimed to have killed 11 people using the exact quote of just under a dozen. Unfortunately, though, it's really hard to say exactly how many that he had killed, because he was a very meticulous, very prepared killer. The FBI believes that there could be as many as 36, but Keyes himself only alluded to about 11, and 3 have only been confirmed. Now, the FBI believes 36 because he may have taken as many as 35 trips between October of 2004 and March of 2012 when he was finally captured. And so it wasn't just that he would fly somewhere and kill people, because if he just flew there and just killed somebody, obviously there would be this paper trail that detectives and stuff would be able to follow to tie more stuff to him. So he would get on a plane and he would fly somewhere, and then he would get a rental car, and then he would drive all the way, thousands of miles to wherever it was that he was going to plan this murder. And then he would do the murder and then drive the car back to where he flew into, and then fly back to wherever it was that he had come from, or not wherever it was he came from, and he would fly back to Alaska. And in these trips that he would make, he would also take and bury these, what he called, and these are his words specifically, he would take and he would bury in areas throughout the United States these kill kits. And what it was they were like 10-gallon buckets from like Home Depot, the orange ones. And he would put things like guns and gloves and plastic bags. He liked to put Drano in him because it would kind of speed up the decomposition process. And he would put everything in these little buckets that he thought he might need to do a kill, and he would bury them all across the United States. And he admitting to having one or more of these kits in Alaska, New York, Washington, Wyoming, and Texas. And I believe I read to this day only 2 have been located, because he would give them generalized ideas. All of the information he ever gave was really vague. Like, he didn't want to go into specifics, and we'll get into why later. He didn't go into specifics, and you'll see that comes up when he gets caught. So just remember that. Everything is very vague. So that was his first kill, and kind of a little bit of background on why he killed. But he also had a couple of rules. The first rule was that he would never kill a child, or he would never kill a mother with a child. He avoided dogs because dogs made everything messy. They were loud, they made noise, they drew attention to the area. And never commit a crime in your home state. Those were kind of all his rules. But you'll see, he broke a rule and he got caught. And according to him, the only reason that he got caught was that he broke that rule. Now, I almost wonder if he wanted to get caught, but we'll talk about that later. So the next thing we're going to talk about in regards to his crime is Samantha Koenig, and she was the most well known of all his victims because she was the one that got him caught. Samantha worked at a coffee kiosk in Anchorage, Alaska called Common Grounds. She was a senior in high school. She was said to be kind, well-liked, responsible, and incredibly hardworking. She always seemed to look out for others and tried to make sure they had everything they needed and always felt like they were included in whatever was happening. And it was said that her dream was to either work with animals or to become a nurse. And if you see pictures of her, she was a beautiful girl. On February 2nd of 2012, a young lady went to open the Common Grounds coffee kiosk only to find out things didn't seem quite right. She found that the door was unlocked. None of the closing duties had been completed, and the cash register had been left open and was empty. She looked to see on the schedule who had closed before and was really surprised to find out that it had been Samantha that had closed the night before, which just kind of added to her confusion because even though Samantha had only been working there for a month and she was really young, she was very reliable as an employee and had always done a very thorough job of closing the stand. So the girl, she calls up her manager and the manager says, all right, well, I want you to go ahead and open the stand as usual and I will take care of the rest on my end. So her boss gets on the phone and contacts the authorities, and the authorities send an officer out to kind of just take a look at things, and pretty quickly they came to the conclusion that what had happened was Samantha had robbed the kiosk and just kind of disappeared into the night. There was a panic button that Samantha had never pushed, so it was really kind of leaning in that direction. Nothing was out of place. It didn't look like anything had been knocked over or that there was some kind of struggle that had gone on. And so the officers began investigating, but it wasn't kind of like a really serious investigating. They were looking for Samantha because they wanted to charge her with robbery. They did, however, interview James, who was Samantha's father, and he told them that on the night of her disappearance, he had had a conversation with her and she had asked him to bring her dinner. But that was kind of pretty much all he knew about it. And he hadn't brought her dinner. He had decided to stay home that night and, just kind of let her fend for herself. So the next step in their investigation was to talk to Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne. And he told the police officers that him and Samantha had kind of been fighting. She had accused him of cheating, so that she had been kind of going over to stay with friends so that they could each have some time to cool down. Later that evening, he had tried to find her, seeing as how she didn't have her truck. He had it, but he hadn't been able to find her. So when her shift ended at the kiosk, he went to go pick her up at 8:30, and he noticed that the kiosk was dark, and it seemed like no one was inside. So he got out of the truck and he went and he walked up to the window just to kind of double check and make sure she wasn't like finishing closing duties or inside, but Samantha wasn't there. So at this point, it's looking even more like, yep, Samantha took the money, she took off, she'd gotten in a fight with her boyfriend, maybe she wanted to, try and run off and start a new life. She was young. Young kids do stupid stuff. However, as soon as the manager to the kiosk handed over the surveillance footage to the police, the investigation quickly changed pace. What that footage showed was that at 8 p.m., Samantha was seen speaking with a customer. She seemed calm. She was talking to him. Nothing seemed wrong. And she started making a drink. And before we get too far into this, it's really important to note the camera doesn't have any audio, so they can't hear anything that's being talked about. And the customer is out of range, so you can see that there's a person there, but you can't see any details about them. It's just kind of a black blob. So all of a sudden, Samantha, her behavior kind of changes a little bit. She turns around and she turns the light off in the kiosk, and they talk a little bit more. And then Samantha kind of turns around and like curls in a ball on the floor. And you can see the person kind of leaning over the counter, talking to her. And then they kind of just climb inside the kiosk. And then it looks like he binds Samantha's hands and he takes the money out of the register. And you can see them walking out of the kiosk together. Or a different camera had shown a different angle of the abduction. So you could see that he had on some kind of mask and a baseball cap. He was really tall. And it didn't really seem like he was forced her into the white Chevy truck, but Samantha was very calm. The whole entire interaction from the point when the customer walks up to the point where Samantha gets in the truck, a whole 17 minutes. So it's not even like it was a quick interaction either. It took a minute for all of that to happen. But nobody could really believe what they had seen. The kiosk was in a parking lot next to a very popular gym. You can even see in the background of some of the surveillance footage, cars driving by. It was also next to a very well-traveled road. Just really crazy. So they believed that since Samantha seemed so calm and it was in such a busy area, Samantha probably knew who the abductor was. Now, with them still focusing on Samantha being a big part of the robbery of the kiosk, her father James had to continue to push very hard for this to be treated as an abduction instead of a robbery, because he knew Samantha, he knew that she wasn't capable of anything like that. And he didn't want the case to go unsolved. He wanted to find his daughter, and so he really just kept pushing. He even set up groups to go around and put posters about Samantha. He took donations to fund reward for information leading to the location of his daughter. And he really ultimately felt responsible, because he felt like if, just maybe he had brought her dinner that night, like she had asked him to, maybe it would have interrupted the kidnapper. It would have stopped whatever happened from happening. But he didn't want to let go of the fact that Samantha was taken. Somebody took his daughter, and he was terrified he was never going to get her back. So he pushed and he pushed, even getting national news coverage for Samantha's case. But it wasn't long before he found out that him and Dwayne, Samantha's boyfriend, were investigators' primary suspects in the case. He did continue even after that to hound the media, to keep attention on the case, to push investigators to continue searching. Dwayne, after finding out about the tape and stuff, Dwayne, Samantha's boyfriend, went back to investigators to say that at 11:30 the night that she got abducted, he received a text from her phone saying that she would be staying at a friend's house that night. And he also said around 3 o'clock in the morning, he had just this really strange feeling that he needed to go outside. And so he went outside and he went to the front of the house where they usually park their vehicles. And that was when he saw a man going through Samantha's truck. And as soon as he saw the man like stood up and just looked at Dwayne. And they kind of locked eyes for a moment, and the man just kind of turned around and walked away. Right after that, James and Dwayne searched the truck. And as far as they could tell, the only thing that was missing was Samantha's driver's license. So police asked Dwayne, "Why didn't you call the police?" And Dwayne said, "Well, as far as I've always known, you have to at least wait 24 hours before you can report a missing person. And there was nothing. I didn't know what to do. I thought I had to wait," which is heart-wrenching. Because at that time, Samantha was probably terrified. I can't even imagine. There was no physical evidence in the case due to the fact that the initial crime scene had been contaminated when the other employee opened the kiosk. Of course, they didn't know they were dealing with an abduction instead of like a robbery, so there was nothing they could do about that. They checked to see if there were any records of Samantha leaving the state, so there were no records of her leaving the state via ship or airplane. They had no record of her having crossed the border, and they were really starting to hit a whole lot of dead ends. There wasn't much of anything they could do. They didn't have any evidence really, and they couldn't find anything. So about 3 weeks after Samantha's disappearance, James received a text message on his phone that had come from Samantha's cell, and it read, quote, "Connor Park sign under the pic of Albert, ain't she pretty?" Which gives me the chills. The park was less than 5 minutes from downtown Anchorage, and when James got there, they found a Ziploc baggie pinned to a bulletin board. Inside, they could see a picture of Samantha and a piece of paper. James did the right thing and called the authorities right away. They came and with full forensics ready to try and find any sign of any evidence to try and catch who it was. They took the bag, they checked for evidence, they opened it up. Inside a bag, of course, like I said, was a picture of Samantha. And it was it was a hard to see picture, but you could see also someone's hand holding up a recent copy of a newspaper. And James really said that in the picture, Samantha just didn't quite look right. Her hair was funny. It didn't seem right. And the ransom note was typed on plain white paper, and it basically demanded $30,000, and it had the numbers for Samantha's debit card on there, instructions on how to get the money into her account, and said that if the demand was met, Samantha would be released in 6 months. So the FBI thought about it and wanted to determine what the best next course of action was on how to safely get Samantha back. So what they did was they instructed James to deposit $5,000 into the account. And there were two things they were hoping for that. One is that the person who wrote the letter would use the card and they would be able to locate him by the ATM, because, ATMs will take pictures and record locations. Or they were hoping that he would get frustrated that he didn't get the full amount, and he would try and make contact with them once again, requesting the remainder of the money, and that if they got him frustrated, then maybe he would make a mistake and leave some kind of evidence they could, get to try and track him. And so those were the hopes. And it would have been really nice to get Samantha back that way. So this is where I'm going to leave you for the ending of part 1. Please come back and hear part 2, where we get into how he was captured and what more we learned after his capture. There's a lot more information in the next one. I really, really hope you come through, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that like button. Hey, there's that fancy little bell down below too that will also notify you every time I upload a new video. And in case you're curious, you can watch me be bad at games on Twitch at that link below. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.